In this exciting episode, it doesn't really matter if Perry can't tell a genuine Van Houten from a Van Johnson. It won't stop him from defending his client. It's Season 2, Episode 9 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Purple Woman. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. We get a bit of legal lexicon from Perry in this episode when he defines torts to future defendant Evelyn Gerard.
You're not responsible for the torts of your husband.
Torts?
Wrongful acts for which civil action may be brought.
Just to flesh out Perry's definition, a tort is a wrongful act that results in injury or damages for which the civil law provides that the injured person may seek recovery from the person who caused the injury. So this is civil court rather than criminal court. Quick question: how many tort cases have we seen Perry in? My mind first goes to the case of the Rolling Bones, but I don't think the writ of habeas corpus hearing that Perry stages for Daniel Reed counts. It would only count if Daniel Reed then sued his nephew Willard and his wife for falsely putting him in the sanitarium and causing him undue mental hardship. The one tort case that does jump to mind is the Robert Finchley hit and run file from the case of the Cautious Coquette.
It's too bad. A client of mine, a young fellow by the name of Robert Finchley, was badly hurt.
If that wily insurance man, Mr. Bates, hadn't gotten involved, we might have seen Finchley in court to hold someone responsible for a tort. Fun fact, we never find out who hit Finchley. Remember, Stephen Argyle lied about hitting Finchley to give himself an alibi and get out of another crime. We just know that Finchley's cash and Stephen Argyle's check, much to the chagrin of the insurance company. So let's keep our eyes peeled for more potential civil torts. And yes, if you're wondering, you could say that the prosecution's tort of defamation of character or malicious prosecution and or false imprisonment might set up one of Perry's many clients quite nicely post-murder trial. But that might compromise chummy post-trial meals between certain prosecutors and certain other defense attorneys. We'll talk more about this later. Without further ado, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Purple Woman. Rufus Varner wears smoking jackets and collects art. More particularly, he collects paintings by Carl Van Houten. You've never heard of him? I've never heard of him, but Varner has. What's more, he's gotten his hands on a Van Houten painting thought to have been lost to the sands of time. but he gets quite a surprise when he tries to show it off.
Where did you obtain this painting?
Let's just say it became available. I'd hate to tell you what the little lady cost me.
I would advise you to get your money back.
What do you mean?
You have been sold a forgery.
Are you out of your mind? It's got to be the real thing. Look at that color, the brushwork.
It is incredible, but not a Van Houten.
And you can decide that with one look?
With one look. You have been swindled by someone who knows a great deal more about art than you do.
Who could have perpetrated this heinous painting forgery? I'm guessing it was Milo Gerard, Varner's art dealer, who had something to do with it.
If there are two ways to do something and one of them is illegitimate, you can trust Milo to pick that way.
In this episode's casting recall, we've got the defendant from Fugitive Nurse, once again playing an aggrieved wife, who portrays Mrs. Evelyn Gerard. We've got divorced wife number 1 from The Case of the Crooked Candle as Milo Gerard's paramour and secretary. And then we've got Lonely Hearts proprietor Edmund Lacey as fraudulent painting creator Aaron Hubble. Speaking of Hubble, we first meet the cognac-soaked painter coming on quite creepily to Mrs. Gerard and then making demands of her husband.
Who knows? I might do as much for you as Goya did for the Duchess of Alba. Or vice versa. You told me if I could paint the Van Houten good enough to fool Rufus Varner, I could write my own ticket.
Oh, don't be naive.
This Milo Gerard, he's a piece of work. Mrs. Gerard decides she's going to need legal help and consults Perry. In doing so, she reveals why she simply hasn't divorced Gerard already.
If by chance you're wondering why I don't get a divorce,
No, I'd assume you had your reasons.
I come from a very straight-laced family, Mr. Mason. My father is a very prominent churchman.
But she's got secrets too, like the affections of art critic Wayne Gordon. Milo Gerard knows all about that.
Well, that was an amusing little charade. Mrs. Gerards, Mr. Gordon. Oh, yes. I know all about Wayne.
And while he's busy threatening divorce, old Milo is getting back rubs from his intellectual secretary.
You must forgive my wife, Doris. She's the emotional type. As an intellectual, you wouldn't understand that. Doris, rub my neck. I'm afraid I'm getting one of my headaches.
You know how this ends up, right? Gerard gets got, and Evelyn Gerard gets arrested. The prosecution seems to have a pretty good case.
I can think of 2 or 3 reasons offhand. 1, your husband instituted suit for divorce. You didn't want it. 2, the police have several statements concerning your quarrels with him. 3, they found your fingerprints on the murder weapon.
Perry, as always, pursues some other suspects. Could it have been Doris Singleton, the woman giving Gerard some preemptive treatment for his headaches?
I was in love with Milo Gerard. And he loved me.
Nah, the only thing she's guilty of is bad judgment. First, that she loved him. Bad move, sister. Number 2, that she thought he loved her. Ha! As if. Suspect number 2 is Wayne Gordon, the boyfriend. Perry never really grills him, and we're not told if Gordon and the now widowed Evelyn get together after the episode. I will say that the nonverbal acting between Bethel Leslie, who portrays Evelyn Gerard, and Donald Murphy, who portrays Wayne Gordon, is quite good. You might want, if you have access to streamable or DVD versions of the show, to go back and look at the scenes in Milo Gerard's office and then in court when Gordon testifies. There's some really great eye exchanges. That leaves 2 men as possible murderers, Rufus Varner and Aaron Hubble. After Perry discovers that the Purple Woman now in Varner's possession is real, Perry and Paul go investigating, and once again, Paul adroitly thinks like a criminal.
I'm trying to put myself in Gerard's place. Now, if I wanted to hide a valuable painting, I certainly wouldn't put it in the gallery vault. It's the first place anybody'd look for it. You know what I'd do? I'd put it right behind another painting of exactly the same size. One that no one in his right mind would even consider buying.
This leads Perry to accuse Varner in court of murder, albeit through a question.
I submit that Gerard swindled you. You wanted revenge. So on the night of May 19th, you went to the gallery and found him alone, and there you killed him.
No.
And after you killed him, you exchanged the fraudulent Purple Woman for the genuine.
No, that's not true.
Then how else did you obtain the genuine painting?
When it turns out Varner didn't commit the crime, Perry turns to Hubble and plays up Hubble's hack work to get the prideful man to confess.
Never mind. You're right, I killed him. He was a scoundrel and a cheat. He promised, Your Honor. He promised if I could fool Varner with a Van Houten, he'd give me a one-man show where the world could learn what Aaron Hubble could do on his own. I'm a genius, Your Honor. Well, I say this in all modesty because it's the truth.
Instead of hearing about Evelyn and Wayne's relationship, we get a dinner with Perry and Hamilton at the episode's end. Like I said, we'll be talking about this more. Before that, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular actor or actress in the episode. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul for this episode, Carl Van Houten. Never heard of him. Why don't we let Wayne Gordon fill us in?
Well, in one of his letters, he mentioned a painting called The Purple Woman.
Oh, yes. That was painted in Arles in 1890 or 91. Van Houten gave the painting to the girl he used for his model. For some unknown reason, she wasn't happy with the portrait and kept it in the cellar. Then around 1895, I think it was, the place burned to the ground.
Our Paul prompt for this episode: is there a comparable real-world artist who matches Van Houten's qualities? Is Van Houten somebody who sort of cobbles together the biography and reputation of 2 or 3 different real artists? Late 19th century, someone who painted portraits, someone who has missing paintings referred to in letters but with whereabouts unknown, or even better, what are the most famous painting forgeries? Is there anyone who meets this basic profile? Our delve this week concerns bad boy George McCready, the thoroughly loathsome Milo Gerard.
Another member of the Hate Gerard Society. I believe you're the president.
McCready was a legit Hollywood leading villain, his most famous role being the antagonist and husband of Rita Hayworth's Gilda in the 1946 film of the same name. McCready was born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1899. He attended Brown University, intended to become a journalist, but acting called to him. He walked himself into a Broadway career in 1926 where he starred for, wait for it, as Arthur Dimmesdale in a production of The Scarlet Letter, a man of the cloth. McCready's distinctive scar came from a car accident and gave him the physical ethos to match his European aristocratic airs. The accident apparently came from a Model T collision with a telephone pole that sent McCready going through the windshield. According to Wikipedia, he was sewed up by a veterinarian. On Broadway, he appeared in a number of Shakespeare productions. His film roles span the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. If you look up any references to him, his 1940s movie villains are highly touted. And after Gilda, he's probably most famous for his role opposite Kirk Douglas in Stanley Kubrick's 50s film Paths of Glory. McCready appeared in 3 more Perry Masons after this one, and he may have been cast because in real life, this dude was an art dealer. He and Vincent Price started an art gallery in 1943 that, alas, only lasted a couple of years. He had 3 children with his wife, who he divorced in 1943. He never remarried. He died of emphysema at the age of 73. Our Perry this episode involves our intrepid hero's own taste in art.
Who painted that?
Paul Daly.
He's a hack. Get rid of it.
This is hilarious to me. Aaron Hubble comes in, immediately recognizes the art on the wall. In fact, the painting was the work of Hollywood-based artist Leon Dussault. Per Jim Davidson, in the Perry Mason book, you can find the same painting that's hanging on Perry's wall in the 1956 film The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. The theme for this episode is imitation. Let's start from the top. I think this is a terrific episode. I think writers Robert Bloomfield and Gene Wang do a pretty good Earl Stanley Gardner imitation themselves as they begin to run out of source material and must rely on their own imaginations. Imitation, it's the sincerest form of flattery, and so the episode manages to imitate the best Earl Stanley Gardner plots, even as it moves beyond his characters and starts to create new characterizations. Obviously, the best kind of imitation is emulation, going on to create something new. The episode itself, of course, is about imitation. We've got the murderer Aaron Hubble, who has forged a Van Houten that has basically fooled one of the world's foremost art collectors, Varner. Varner is himself an imitation of an expert, and McCready tells him so.
New York, Paris, Rome. The whole art world is waiting to laugh at your pretentiousness. And you have the enormous vanity of most ignorant men.
Hubble himself is an imitation of a real artist. He thinks because he can imitate the work of real artists, that makes him a real artist. Here's my question, though, Hubble. Where are your originals? What paintings exactly would be in your one-man show? Cognac next to a bowl of fruit? Cognac next to an easel? A still life of cognac just outside some prison bars? I know that was a low blow. But it makes me wonder whether he's actually painted the things that would be in the show he keeps bugging Milo Gerard to give him. And finally, I just want to mention, perhaps our best imitation artist is Paul Drake, who once again imitates the thoughts of a criminal and comes through in the clutch. For the second consecutive episode, Paul is able to think like a scoundrel and put Perry on the right track. In season 1, it often felt like Paul was just a pair of helping hands, but that he was never himself crucial in solving the crimes. In fact, I made a collage of him getting a lot of the cases wrong. This season, however, we see Paul making discoveries. It may also indicate that Paul has been spending too much time with criminals if he finds it that easy to imitate their thought patterns, but that's a problem for another episode. Now, it's time for a Perry proverb. As promised, let's talk about that denouement. In this very special edition of the Perry Proverb, we get Mason quoting someone else's wisdom. That someone just happens to be, gulp, Hamilton Berger?
Della, there was an article in the Law Journal recently. Let me quote you the last paragraph. A well-tried criminal case is a credit to all involved. There is no winning or no losing in the true administration of justice. The article was signed Hamilton Berger.
Let's say it. It's a great quotation, so I have no problem giving it to Perry here as a Perry proverb. Here's the problem, though. Hamilton had better hope there is no winning or losing in the courtroom, because that's the only way to explain why he's done nothing but lose murder cases in a major U.S. city to the same defense attorney for almost 2 years. The implication, as Perry delivers the line, is, on the one hand, to Della, hey, let's let the opposition eat with us. We're on the same side. We're on the side of justice. But the implication is also firmly pointed back at Hamilton, which is, you're in print now saying a well-tried case is what you care most about. You care about justice. So how's about laying low a little bit when you start accusing me of using courtroom pyrotechnics? Live up to your own words, Hamilton. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Our research prompt from the last episode involved horse trainers, specifically Bob Allen's speech about what it takes for a trainer to get a hold of a horse like Bright Magic.
You know what a trainer has to do to get a horse like Bright Magic? Starts out a gyp at the fairs. $200 claimers, lame, brittle, windbroken. Then you work yourself up. But you don't find a horse like Bright Magic. Oh, no. They don't even run at the half-milers. You have to sort of graduate. Move up to the mile tracks. Then to the Big Apple.
Big Apple?
Yeah, Saratoga, Belmont. You know, the equivalent of Santa Anita and Hollywood Park out here. And then you work and slave and pray and hope that you'll find a horse like Bright Magic. Even then, at 6 to an even, you'll never make it.
Our prompt was this. Did Bob Allen's speech have any basis in reality? John Searcy, my father, did some serious research and writes, quote, my research indicates 90% Hollywood, 10% reality in Allen's speech. One approach to respond to this prompt was answering the question, what criteria should an owner use to choose a trainer? After all, it is the owner that chooses the trainer, not the other way around. If I owned a champion thoroughbred or a potential champion thoroughbred, I would be careful in choosing the trainer. Therefore, if I was a trainer who wanted a crack at training quality horses, I would want to be aware of these factors. My dad sent me a link to a blog written by someone who had horses that he had trained, and it listed some pertinent criteria for choosing a good trainer. They included basic things like references, the facilities the trainer had at his disposal, and of course, getting written agreements that specified the relationship between the trainer and owner. As far as the horses go, things like geography and turf matter for the owner who's looking to entrust a potentially prized thoroughbred to a trainer's care. My dad concluded, quote, in addition to the above, my research indicated that good trainers must have a great deal of technical training that must be in evidence before they can train horses at any level. While what Bob Allen said is not false, it appears that many more mundane aspects of training must be addressed in order to have the opportunity to train a horse in the class of Bright Magic, end quote. The gist, don't think you're going to be able to use Bob Allen's track record as something to imitate on your way to being a trainer for a horse like Bright Magic. Wonderful work, Dad. Thank you. My dad also added a correction to a detail from last episode I got wrong. I mentioned that Mrs. Banyan was also Martha Rayburn from The Case of the Hesitant Hostess. I added that she was the Danceland Ballroom's owner. Incorrect. She is, you guessed it, the manager. Thanks also to my Aunt Myra, Lars Soderlin, and Marge Helsper for their emails. Marge gave me some details she found funny in the case of the substitute face. In the case of the buried clock, she writes, in the case of the substitute face, I noticed that when Carl Hauser gets the money he stole from the file cabinet, he takes it from the M drawer. For money, of course. And in the case of the buried clock, I noticed the sheer silliness of Jack Hardesty as he sings and divides the money between the bank box and his overnight case.
Big ones for me, daddy-yum, daddy-yum. Big ones for me, little ones for you. Big ones for me, daddy-yum, daddy-yum. Little ones for you, daddy-yum, daddy-yum.
I love it. If you have tiny details you dig about a particular episode or an acting performance, please let me know. We want to celebrate the best parts of the show. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something you'd like to comment on or something you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website or email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. All PerryPod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thanks again so much for joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time as Perry offers the definition of detective. He's somebody you should know. It's the case of the fancy figures. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.